Hi everyone, welcome to another episode of AI Talks. I'm your host Avi, and with me is Gib again. Hey Gib, how you doing?
I'm good, Avi. How are you?
Doing well. And I'm really excited about today's topic because it's a topic that's so close to our heart. That is why we even started Berry Jam. But I'm not going to talk about all about Berry Jam. I'm going to talk about what we want to talk about, which is the importance of enabling decision making at the organizational leadership or all throughout the organization in a way that's supported by data, but more importantly, enabling and empowering people with those decision making, irrespective of their technical skill and ability. So one of the problems that I see again and again, or have seen for a while, is that in many organizations there is a misalignment between talent and the tools available to decide, make those decisions. And that's the area we want to talk about today. How do we make sure that more people in the organization are looking at data, looking at insights, and making better decisions? So tools, talent, misalignment in the space of AI, it's even going to get worse. So it's an interesting topic. It's the reason why we even built Berry Jam to make AI accessible and affordable, and even very very easy for people to use. But with us today, Gib, we've got some very exciting person to talk to. Gib, do you want to chime in?
Yes, Avi. So we have as our guest today, Tom Davenport. So if you're not familiar with Tom, he is a very long-time thought leader in the analytics space, author, professor. And I first met Tom, I believe, it was probably around 2007 when I was working for an analytic technology company at that point in time. Competing in Analytics was his book back then that many people, both on the customer and the vendor side, had latched onto as very interesting. But the official sort of bio for Tom, for those unfamiliar, he's a distinguished professor of information technology and management at Babson College. He's visiting professor of Oxford Business School. He's a fellow of the MIT Initiative on the Digital Economy and senior advisor to Deloitte's AI practice. So very busy in many places. He's published 23 books, over 300 articles for Harvard Business Review and many other publications. He's been among the world's top 25 consultants, the top 3 business/technology analysts, the 100 most influential people in the IT industry, and the top 50 business school professors in the world. He's worked with many of the world's leading companies on data analytics and AI strategies. So that is Tom Davenport. So thanks again, Tom, for being here. We really appreciate your time. And Avi, I'll hand it off to you to kind of kick things off with Tom.
Excellent. Thank you very much, Tom, for joining us. And look, anyone who's worked in the field of data science knows your name. I remember one of the early papers that I'd read was about data science being one of the sexiest jobs. And
Yeah, you probably like that as a data scientist.
hey,
But I had to keep reminding people it's sexiest job, not sexiest people. Although I'm sure you're a very sexy person, Avi.
hey, that I couldn't be very sexy, so I had to go for the job.
That's a funny distinction. Yeah.
So look, really appreciate you joining and sharing your wisdom with us today. So in this field, you've worked across different organizations, different businesses, different levels. In your experience, what do you think are the biggest hurdles organizations and businesses face when they try to get non-technical employees to go through data or make decisions for organizations?
Well, there's always been this communication gap between people who had the technical skills to get at the data and to manipulate it with various technologies to analyze it, and the people who make the business decisions, run the business, or do the day-to-day work of the organization. And there have been various attempts to kind of close that gap over the years. The business analyst role was kind of created for that purpose, and there were various other intermediary kinds of roles created throughout the years. But I have come to the conclusion that really the best way to overcome that gap is to have the people who are going to make the decision, live with the decision, take the actions based on it, to do at least a substantial part of the work themselves to get the data and analyze the data. And I think we're kind of moving in that direction. Sounds like Berry Jam is certainly in that direction.
Mhm.
The technology is getting easier and easier, and I think people are getting more facile with the technology.
Mhm.
We use it every day, you know, in our phones and our apps and so on. So I think that's the best and easiest way to close that long-standing gap that we've faced.
Yeah, traditionally, there's been always been sort of a divide. You had the business team who would ask the technical IT folks to go run the analysis, come back, and then the business team would then sort of infer for it and then use their judgment to make decisions. But what
Right.
you're
That
advocating.
would be there also a time gap of perhaps 6 months while they that they took to analyze the data.
Absolutely, and there's always that gap. Like I know in many organizations, I've seen the gap between the IT technical folks and the business folks. The IT folks feel unappreciated, unwelcome sometimes, and they go, those business guys, they don't know what they're talking about. And meanwhile, the business folks are talking about those IT folks don't know how to run a business. And so there's always that inherent sort of tension. Not to mention the time gap. And so, what are you suggesting? How do you're suggesting we can get past this by just empowering more business folks to be able to get their hands dirty and feel the pain?
Well, it's certainly one way, and I think we have had this sort of culture of mutual disparagement between these two groups, and you may not be able to close the gap completely by providing tools and technologies to the business people to do this work themselves. But I think it does lead to a higher level of mutual understanding between the groups if they sort of they understand each other better as they try to address this problem jointly rather than just throwing it over the wall and saying IT people do this analysis for me.
Hey Tom, I thought your first statement was really brilliant in terms of describing business analysts versus the business, and that the trend in the foreseeable future should be that business people kind of have more skin in the game. They take more ownership of the decision by being more actively involved, by having the ability to do things without necessarily having a huge amount of expertise. So considering that condition gets overlaid on companies for the past 10 or 20 years who have adopted many different technologies to try to solve this gap today. So, as you know, and I know from the vendor side, is that, marketing, working with maybe like Adobe or Salesforce, the analysts that support that have a certain requirements for different types of analytical data requirements that then also match up with some sort of business requirements that differ very much from people that are working in the SAP environment. And so therefore, these different groups acquire different technologies and tools to become productive, and maybe it works. But then, how do you foresee, in light of that, in this future state where there's this transition or this complementary nature where suddenly the business people, do you think is it natural evolution, or is it going to cause tension? And this is a bit of a loaded question, just because what I'm implying in my question is that a lot of the times, because these things sort of start small but they start to grow, is that IT does not have sort of visibility into it. And so I would imagine that the strongest companies from an analytics perspective, a maturity perspective, they have strong IT and data analytics leadership that look at this more holistically across the business, and try to anyway, just from a governance, safety, security perspective, especially with generative AI and the desire to do more advanced things. I'm just curious, like how you foresee like that shaking out, because obviously every company is very different, but I just imagine that, it could be challenging or it could be something that's very natural.
Yeah, well, I think historically it has been very challenging, and you've had IT people who looked upon this as kind of shadow IT or rogue IT,
Mhm.
and the business people probably didn't like being viewed as criminals for doing this sort of work. So, but on the other hand, they wanted to get their jobs done, so they didn't talk much about it unless they absolutely had to. But I think it's definitely changing, and I've been doing research for a new book coming out in late October. I have to credit my co-author with the title, which I think is a great title, All Hands on Tech. And the subtitle is The AI-Powered Citizen Revolution. And we were, I think, quite surprised to find a number of really big, traditional, old, in some cases, companies where they're saying, we really have to engage the people on the quote business side to do some of this activity because we just got our plates are full. We want to digitize our business. We can't do it all by ourselves. And it helps us overcome that long-standing gap that we were describing. And so, I don't know, big companies, Shell, AT&T, Chevron, Toyota, BMW, none of these you think of as necessarily being pioneers in terms of technology, maybe AT&T, at least in the old days, but they're really making this a key component of how they build digital solutions. And I was a little bit, our book talks about citizen development of applications and citizen automations. My co-author, Ian Barkin, is a automation-oriented guy. I was the sort of citizen data science advocate, and I wasn't sure how much of that I'd find, but it's right up there with the other two types. I had worked previously with some vendors in the automated machine learning space, but it was still, I think, too complex for many non-professional data scientists to really understand. It was ironic. I mean, the amateurs found it too complex, and the data scientists said, "Oh, this is too easy. It can't be any good." And so I think that whole category struggled. But a lot of companies really making possible citizen data science and automated machine learning, sometimes calling it that, sometimes not, on a very broad scale. And of course, AI, generative AI is enabling a lot of this stuff because you want a data analysis, just issue a 2-line prompt to the advanced data analysis component of ChatGPT, and voila, you've got, Python code and 3 pages of analysis. So it's really, I think the barriers are falling down every day.
In your and Ian's research for the book, I'm just curious, one of the things that Avi's talked a lot about as a data scientist representing their community, he talks about experimentation, a culture of that being really important. One of our guests in another podcast talked about this, a chief data officer. And so I'm just curious if in your research you found any sort of conflict between that sort of concept, which business people that are very binary, a report's a report, a number's a number. Like experimentation is not sort of in conflict with that, but a business analyst that's trying to report at the business or forecast the inventory or whatever, it's a little bit different than sort of experimentation. I'm just curious if the Toyotas, the AT&Ts, if they're sort of rationalizing this, or am I just imagining that that's not really the case, and that these things kind of go hand in hand, just because it just seems that you need to understand the distinction, maybe.
Yeah. And I think that many of them are open to experimentation. Obviously, as you suggested earlier, Gib, there are some constraints on experimentation. If you're talking about, I don't know, what interest rates to charge for a loan in a bank, there are going to be some guardrails and some governance approaches that prevent people from doing something that's either going to hurt the bank's performance or get their regulators upset or something along those lines. But we've been studying this for a year and a half or 2 years now, and haven't really found a single example of a major disaster that results from this stuff. I quote a friend of mine who's a data scientist working for an insurance company. I asked him what he was thinking and doing with citizen data science, and he said, we prefer not to put sharp knives in the hands of children. But, sharper and sharper knives are being put in the hands of younger and younger kids, and we're not seeing that they're cutting themselves or in any visible way.
That's a great insight, because I'm sure there's a lot of people that more presume maybe what I was asking about, and that's really good to hear. And I'm sure that's a function of really understanding, as the people that you're talking to that are not making big mistakes, it's a function of their knowledge and awareness and understanding how things are working, and that gives them greater confidence such that they can execute these things more consistently and with less risk, I would imagine.
Yeah, and ideally, I think what you would want is if you're a citizen developer, you're developing an application, maybe you take that to an IT person and say, how does this look? If you're a citizen data scientist, you develop some machine learning model and you show it quickly to a professional data scientist to say, have I violated any statistical assumptions? Have I overfit this model? Whatever, and have them, sign off on it informally or even formally in some cases if it's an important model.
I think you just wrote something recently about this, didn't you? I thought I'd read something about you were talking about sort of that sort of process, that sort of idea of the business.
Well, yeah, I believed in it for, I have a hard time keeping track of what I wrote, but I believed in it for a long time, and I think I've probably written about it in a few places. And it's IT professionals sometimes say, "Oh, I don't want to spend my time with these amateurs. I'd much rather, be an IT professional and work with other IT professionals if I have to work with people at all." Not stereotyping them there at all. And data scientists thinking, "Oh God, I got in this business because I want to develop great algorithms. I don't want to. If I wanted to teach people, I would have gone into a low-paying university job." But I think not everybody is going to like it, but there are some people who actually like the sort of consulting, coaching component of these roles. And in the companies we found where they kind of try to institutionalize it, they've had no difficulties finding people who are willing to do it. And some of them actually, it's their favorite part of their jobs.
So, yeah. I mean, and Evie, before you move to the next question, I mean, when you were at Amazon and you were doing the work there, you probably were directing a lot of the work that you did. But I mean, were there business people that came to you with things, or did you come to them? Or I'm just curious, how that worked. I mean, obviously that's in the past, early innovation, but I'm just curious.
I mean, Amazon itself is a very different organization, right? So culturally, it was very, very different, unique. There's a lot more empowerment for software engineers and technical staff within the company, and so there was a lot more onus on them because, and as Tom said earlier, you're in charge, so you don't mess it up, right? If you're responsible for making the decision, you really think through this. The culture part of it is very important. How do you make sure the different stakeholders work towards a common unifying theme or values, right? So Amazon's very clear on that, in terms of its customer focus, it's very strong, and internal value structure is very good. A lot of it comes also down to this is an interesting part where there are roles for everybody, right? So there are different people who really thrive in educating and teaching, and then there are others who really thrive in making the connections. I think the modern organization is evolving to recognize that roles and behaviors within the organization evolve with the people, and you have the knowledge, they have the talent, and you bring in the people and then let them evolve some of this stuff. But that means that different people will have different expectations and different skill set. And if you look at the no code landscape, not all no code landscape are created equal for everyone. You've got some machine learning capabilities where, yes, you can click, drag and drop and connect the dots. That's wonderful. But the insights are so technical that someone without a PhD or a master's in that area just won't be able to understand and interpret it. And on the other hand, the effort required could be so monumental that you're spending so much time just connecting, building, and then you've just spent so much time of your own resource time rather than just, hey, can you look at it? Tom, in that space with the survey and you've done at all the citizen development tools and capabilities out there, have you sort of noticed that like different categories of these sort of experiences?
Yeah, I think so. I'll tell you a story that it really shaped my thinking a lot. There's this journal out of one of my alma maters, called Harvard University. You may have heard of it, and it's called the Harvard Data Science Review. And I really like the guy who started it. And I want, Harvard's trying to compete with MIT, its Cambridge neighbor, in knowing something about AI and data and so on. So I'm supportive of the effort. And for a while, I was editor of a column that is called, I don't know, Industrial Data Science Learning, or I don't know, something about, it's about data science in business.
Mm-hmm.
And we had a hard time. The columns had to be reviewed by 3 peer reviewers, which I thought was crazy. But, and so as a result, we had a hard time finding people to write them. So I wrote one myself called Deployment as a Critical Data Science Capability.
Mm-hmm.
And in a nutshell, my view was no deployment by data scientists means no employment for data scientists in business. If you don't deploy, no economic value, why are you even there? So the editors sent this to 3 peer reviewers, and 2 of them said, what is this person talking about? Data scientists should not be bothered with issues around deployment. It's, they're there to kind of think great thoughts, great algorithmic thoughts, and muck around with data, and deployment should be somebody else's job. And so I think you find, though, in many organizations, frankly, I think, I don't know if you're familiar with this idea of data products, the idea that the output of a lot of this work should be a data product, something that is used either in the business or by customers.
Mm-hmm.
It's created like a product, monitored like a product, managed over time like a product. In the organizations adopting the data product orientation, that seems to lead to data scientists saying, hey, I'm just part of a team to make stuff happen, and whatever I need to do, I'm happy to do.
Mm-hmm.
And they're as interested in deployment as the machine learning engineers or the data engineers or the data product managers, for that matter. So I think it's the culture of saying we're here to get stuff done, and I'll do whatever is necessary to make that a reality.
And that's part of the reason why there's such an there's culture of getting stuff done, right? That is the reason, the impetus for why different business units can't just wait until there is sprint capacity on the backlog of data scientists or technical teams. That is why these tools are sort of emerging, right? We need to get this done. We need to make important decisions in the next EBR. How do I inform that decision based on the data and evidence that we've got? And so, you've got, and tools like ChatGPT are both a blessing and something scary. This is the new sharp tool, as you said, sharp knife that some kids will cut themselves with.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, who knows if it's generating hallucinatory Python code or not. I doubt anybody's even going to look at the Python code generally who's using that approach. And, I'm sure it's not the perfect tool, but I must say I marvel at the productivity of issuing a 2-line prompt and getting a quite complex machine learning model out as a result, with treatments of missing data and some feature engineering and explanations of which features are driving the outcome most, and so on.
Yeah. And look, shameless plug here, BerryJam AI that we've built, we try to blend LLM capabilities with the traditional statistical and machine learning capabilities, because we recognize everything has its place, right? You can't use LLM to dive deep into the statistical methods, which have been proven for the last 50, 60 years, right? So there's place for everything. But LLMs are super useful when you're trying to look at text, you're trying to address the burden of the interface. So no more clicking around, just talk to it. It becomes more natural, sort of an engagement between the user and the AI. So that's a space. Are you looking, when you're looking at all the tools and capabilities out there, adoption of these tools is sometimes differs from different organizations. Are you seeing any trends between organizations? How do they even go about letting these knives in the hands of children at different ages?
Well, that's an interesting question. I mean, I would say um, adoption of tools is very variant across organizations, particularly in the citizen data science space. So you've got Alteryx, with which Gib is quite familiar. Um, I think it's in many people's minds, it's a combination of a sort of a tool for integrating data blending, as it was once called, and it does some analysis as well. That's pretty well accepted in organizations, I would say, by users, not always by IT organizations. They say, oh, you could write Python code to do this. Yes, but I can't write Python code. Um, uh, the automated machine learning tools, as I say, were probably too complex for many non-technical users. You've got a lot of people trying to do stuff in Power BI, which is increasingly, capable of things like machine learning. You can call Azure data and algorithms and so on if you want to. You might be more likely to get into trouble that way. You had people doing it in Excel at some point. Then you have a variety of other tools that people are starting to use for this purpose. The point and click descriptive analytics tools, Click and
Mm-hmm.
Tableau and so on, are adding capabilities. So lots people are coming at this from a lot of different ways, as I'm sure you know. You are in this marketplace, and I'm not sure anybody has said, "Oh, we found the perfect tool to do all of this work." So maybe that's what Berry Jam is. I'm looking forward to seeing more about
Oh, absolutely. We got it all covered.
it.
And Tom, I used to think that one of the barriers to adoption for things like the automated machine learning for non machine learning professionals or data scientists was that um, in addition to being complicated, was just understanding exactly what was happening, such that I could stand behind whatever I was producing and put it into production, put it into effect, and good result, bad result happens, but then I have to explain it to my boss or the group or whatever. And I used to believe that that was the case in large part because having worked for a large enterprise software company previous to Alteryx, the online help for some of those functions was just immensely complicated that the user was intended to go look at. And I just can't imagine they were going there to look at the detailed documentation around here are the assumptions that are built into this. It was like a huge education. But I'm wondering now if it's reaching a point where, because of ChatGPT, that like you said, that you're not seeing a lot of people make mistakes, that confidence is rising such that they're willing to embrace maybe those functions or the capabilities without necessarily having to really understand a lot of those assumptions and details, presuming that they can at least test it out or experiment with it, see that it works, and it almost becomes like another field or another variable. So it's not like, instead of like the sales result, here's the predicted sales result, and that's our predicted sales result. And I don't have to like interrogate that. I don't have to go into have a meeting to discuss exactly why that number is what it is. It's just it is what it is because we believe that what's behind it. I'm just wondering what you think about that.
I think that there are an awful lot of people who drive cars without knowing how internal combustion engines and
Yeah.
transmissions and so on work. I think you're probably right that we'll move more in that direction. The world has not been a highly probabilistic place for a long time. People don't want ranges, they want absolute predictions.
Yeah.
What did somebody say about that? All absolute predictions have one thing in common: they're wrong. But maybe we're getting to the point where people are comfortable with prediction and probability, and will not worry so much about exactly how it was computed or programmed.
And so it would certainly lead to higher adoption of those capabilities and the use cases which support them, if it is in fact a barrier, which I presumed it has been, just because the people in the business tend to not have statistics degrees or mathematics backgrounds, and they're more of a business process type of person, and so they don't necessarily understand any of that underlying logic.
Yeah. Well, all the generative AI stuff is statistically based as well underneath, and it's just making predictions of what the next word is. And many people seem to be very comfortable with
Exactly.
that.
Totally, exactly. And yeah, and myself and you guys as well, I'm sure, have used it to all sorts of ends. And so you're right. I mean, I think that the interface and the ability to interact with it and get value really, really fast, without necessarily having to question what's going on is maybe that's like a secret sauce that's going to start to emerge around, companies that do this really well.
Yeah, I don't, it's interesting. I think I've been talking to a fair number of companies about the sort of productivity and the value issues related to generative AI. And it reminded me of something that happened with some of my students. So I teach a course on AI for business at Babson. I have since 2016. And now I have them do all of their research and writing with generative AI. But I say, okay, you have to use it the right way. You have to try out multiple prompts and show me what prompts you use. You have to take the output you like best and edit it to show me how you changed it. And if there's any factual material, you have to, Google it or something to make sure that it's not a hallucination. And several of them have said, geez, it was easier in the old days when I just looked up something in Wikipedia and paraphrased it a little bit, So I guess there's a lot of productivity. Sometimes I think if you do this the way we really should to make sure it's accurate and useful and interesting, it's not all that much more productive sometimes.
Well, yeah, it's fascinating because like the code assistant, where you can basically come in, like you say, generate me Python code that will prompt the Llama 2 API and give me back this thing. As a non-Python coder, I've done this. I've played around with it. And so if I was working in a business and I was coming at it from that perspective, I could spend 2 or 3 weeks trying to arrive at this situation without ever really understanding the detailed Python code. And maybe it works, maybe it doesn't. But what would be the right thing to do in that instance? It would be the right thing would be to learn Python and learn, and approach the problem professionally, with guardrails and in a formal development methodology, not just do it sort of in an ad hoc fashion. So I think that's probably one of the hurdles that will define a lot of the use cases that get used, because it makes no sense to have someone just fumble around and try to do something. Like you said, if I can just go to Wikipedia and get the answer, then I'm ready to roll, right? So it's interesting.
Yeah. And just on that, like I use LLMs to improve my productivity and I know how to code, I know how to develop. And the fact that I know how to develop means that I can ask the right questions of the LLM and prompt it the right way, and then interpret the result and be able to say, no, you got it wrong, go back and try again. But the risk is asking people who don't know how to code or haven't got a sort of an understanding of the fundamentals of programming, cannot review the code that's produced. And so if there's an error, that error is going to cascade. So the risk is, and look, anyone can go and do this, right? The question is, what are you willing to risk in order to do this? Are you willing to bet the company's success or profits or margins in future on this sort of decision making where you don't have oversight, you don't have someone who actually knows it? For experts, it's fantastic. Like it is definitely, if you're a programmer and you're not using LLM, then you're actually leaving a lot of efficiencies off the table. But Tom, are you sort of seeing that sort of a challenge in the conversations you're having with people?
Yeah, well, I think the consensus view now is that code generation really works well for experienced coders, not so much for totally novice coders. And my guess is that generative AI for analytics and data science and even automation is in its early phases, and just code development broadly speaking. I think the smart thing to do there would be to either learn something about programming or data science or whatever, so you can review it yourself, or maybe more likely show it to somebody else who knows what they're doing and can say, you made this mistake and this mistake. go back to the drawing board, or this is pretty complex. Maybe this isn't the right problem for you to be working on with this tool. Then I hate publicizing Gartner because God knows they get enough publicity already. But they created this idea of fusion teams where we have amateurs and professionals. They were mostly talking about citizen development oriented amateurs working with IT people to sort of get stuff done. And I hope we can see that in other domains of citizenry as well. And even outside of information technology altogether, you see more and more scientists who say, yeah, there's a role for citizen science, not doing everything, but doing some important things, and they just work with us.
Yeah.
This reminds me of some of our friend Bill Shub, who you both know, who has said as a citizen developer for a large toy manufacturer that he would love for IT to teach him agile development methods, and or have like could collaborate around these things because they don't understand those things, but they're given the capabilities of doing the work product typically associated with these professional processes related to production, programming and things like that. It seems like organizationally, like that's got to happen. In some respect, maybe not necessarily with the really easy to use sort of business user enabled sort of just here's ask a question like what were sales yesterday, what will sales be next week, or what salesperson do I need to help, etc. I mean, what do you think of that, Tom? You think that's going to happen, or has it happened among those larger companies?
It's definitely happening at some companies. I'm not sure it's happening in Bill's company, which he talks about on social media a fair amount. But yeah, I think it's good for cultures to embrace these mixed roles and hybrid kinds of teams, and I hope more and more of it happens. I think it'll make life better for both sides eventually.
Yeah, I mean, what I immediately think of is that in a large organization, a large pharmaceutical company, a large telecommunications company that is using 5 to 10 different data and analytic technologies, a mix of platforms and tools and things of this nature, if they were to do something like this, I'm curious in my head thinking, in practice, does it happen by sort of user group and by sort of use case and tool, or do they have sort of a standard to apply across all of them? Because what's going to happen is that people suddenly will become aware of the diversity of things occurring. Because I imagine large companies, leadership doesn't necessarily have they don't have instant visibility into the fact that, oh wow, we're using 4 or 5, 6 different things in our business, and they all sort of overlap, but they all have a distinct capability, and I don't understand how they were even selected. And I'm just thinking like ahead to that. I'm wondering if that's a good thing. I mean, it's part of this rationalization that's occurred as post COVID, where it's like let's standardize on our tooling and let's eliminate all the dark IT investment and the like. But
there, Gib, look, there's always going to be that push and pull, right? So there's always been new products coming on, new solutions coming on, and part of it is experimentation. Which tool seems to work well with different people, and people generally will pick the one that seems to work well for them. And
at that moment in time, like I'm a business person, I'm empowered. I want to use something. I'll go do it, right?
Yeah. So some of it I suspect is, look, they'll programmers and developers will have a particular viewpoint and they have a particular bias. That's why some of the the auto ML tools haven't actually been very successful amongst serious data scientists, right? And on the other end of this spectrum, you've got people who can't live without their Excel and can't move out of the Excel, right? And so you're going to have people picking different tool sets for the different thing. I love the idea of blending a lot of the teams together so they have better empathy for each other and understanding of each other's role. Because once you do that, then you start to break down a lot of the communication barriers, or why is this taking so long, or why you're asking this a question again. So there's a better we did it at TrackPhone, by the way. We had much more blended teams where we call them tiger teams, to get together and work on projects together from business and data engineering and data science and software engineering, and work together on particular projects. But in terms of by the way, when you're talking about the tools misalignment, the business person could only handle some of the tools. And now with the new ecosystems that's emerging with evolution of these tool sets, you're going to find a lot more of the capabilities that were traditionally done by very, very technical people moving more in the business side. and that allows the technical people to go after the things that they couldn't have gone after because there was no capacity to. So these no-code tools are phenomenal for productivity improvement, enhancement. Tom, have you come across any stats or numbers or surveys of how much these no-code tools or enabling citizen developers in data science have actually contributed to organizations?
Only not across organizations, but within them. For example, Alteryx has an executive who used to work for Stanley Black and Decker, and they had identified some areas of the business that during a period of some economic difficulty for the company, some areas that were really important to their profitability. And they used a broad citizen development oriented approach to really start addressing those areas, to understand what was driving them much more. And it made a big improvement. I forget, it's either 1 billion or 2 billion kind of benefit to the bottom line. The problem, I think, in many cases is companies don't have a strategic objective for this other than let's get more digitization out there, more systems, more data, more applications being developed. And I think that could lead to a good result, but in general, I think a more targeted set of objectives are maybe more valuable, where either it's a financial objective or an innovation objective. I mean, one of the things that's quite interesting to me in the pharmaceutical industry, life sciences in general, you have these really smart MD, PhDs now who are basically smarter about technology than almost any IT professional in their organizations, and they want to develop stuff on their own. And the areas in which they're working are so abstruse technically that nobody's going to understand the data but them. And so, I think companies like Johnson and Johnson and Sanofi and so on have said, yeah, citizen development is something and citizen data science is something that we have to do to have people innovating at the pace that we need.
Yeah,
I think,
sorry. Go ahead, Gid.
I was just going to say, I think the distinction you bring, Tom, to this idea of data and analytics, having an objective, like let's save $100 million, let's make $100 million, versus let's enable a bunch of people to make better decisions and then see what happens. I think that's really interesting and important, and it fits in with this idea of the experimentation and just what is the objective of the organization by doing these types of things, and what are the expectations, because if the benefit lags, the implementation and people change in and out of jobs, the value may not be as apparent to the people who are there, and that is never a good thing either. So I just think that that's kind of an interesting point.
Yeah, we didn't find that many CEOs who were that interested in citizen development, because I think they think, who cares who develops that stuff? I didn't pay any attention to the IT department. Why should I pay any attention to the citizens who are developing it? I think that's not a good situation. It should be something that they think is really going to affect their success as an organization.
Yeah, I mean, it brings to mind, again, don't want to advertise anybody, but like McKinsey has the research that they publish where they forecast, AI is going to contribute $1 trillion across all these industries, and here are all the different types of use cases. And maybe CEOs look at that and think that's really cool and interesting. I want to know more about how I could do that within my industry. At the same time, it's vague, abstract, and needs to be applied. And again, the value may materialize precisely as we hope, or it may not, but we're not sure. And it may take time, and people may swap out of jobs and roles, and et cetera. And it may depend on new technology we have to acquire, new skills. And so it's just not turnkey. It's not buying a business application that's going to automate a specific business process.
That's certainly fair to say. Yeah, sometimes I think those numbers are kind of pulled out of the air. No, I used to work at McKinsey. No reflection on them. It's just really hard to make that kind of prediction.
Agree.
Just on that, we all recognize AI is important. Accelerate tool capability. We know data-driven decision making is important. But in this area of citizen data science, something you said, Tom, really got me thinking. The the CEOs need to pay attention at how they accelerate their team's capacity and capabilities. Like, how do you empower them? Because if you just leave it to the IT department to take care of that, still a small group versus all of the organization. I know we did some analysis and we saw, look, between business savvy people, data analysts, data engineers, and software engineers and data scientists, 65% of the people are the non-technical people. And so
Hmm.
if you as a CEO is not looking at empowering that 65% of your employee base, you're leaving a lot of efficiency and productivity on the table.
Yeah, I mean, a couple of comparisons come to mind, or one comparison of two organizations. So, um, we were very impressed by some things that Shell was doing in citizen development, but it was driven by the IT department largely. And I looked to see, did the CEO ever say anything about this? I couldn't find anything. On the other hand, one of your many former employers, Avi, Microsoft, Satya Nadella, I mean, you could argue, of course, their vendor, he's sort of pushing the technology that they sell, but he's really advocated that everybody get engaged in this stuff. And, Microsoft seems to be doing quite well. Who knows how much that has to do with the reason, but he's really empowered everybody to get out and analyze data and make decisions and speed that whole process up. And I think that's, if I had to choose one or the other, I would choose that approach.
That's wonderful. Look, I know we're almost out of time, so I'm going to try and bring some thoughts back. I think this has been a fantastic conversation around how the landscape is evolving to enable more and more people and empower more people to participate. And I love what you said very early on, Tom, about if you're going to do the analysis and you want to be make a decision, you want to be part of the process to get to the decision. You want to make the analysis. So. Um, Across the board, I think there's a lot of things that are happening. Any words of wisdom how organizations should think about navigating through this dramatic shift and change that we're seeing in the ecosystem?
Well, we in the book we try to say, okay, you have to get going with this. We call that the genesis process.
Mm-hmm.
It's better. A lot of companies it just sort of bubbles up, but I think it's better to plan it a little bit and figure out where you're going to emphasize it and have some objectives, as we were discussing. We talk about the need for guardrails, guidance, and governance,
Mm-hmm.
and I really don't like the term governance very much. Nobody likes to be governed. We'd like to be able to do things with autonomy and independence, but there's some areas, particularly if you're in a regulated business or if you're making, big financial decisions with these algorithms or whatever, you need to, make sure that people who know what they're doing are taking a look. The guidance and the guardrails are more just educating people, making it easy to do the right thing, building it into the technology as much as possible to say, that might not be the best way to analyze this particular model because you appear to be violating this statistical assumption, or you clearly overfit the model. We don't have that yet so much. Maybe you do in Berry Jam, but in many of the products that I've seen for data science. But we do have it in, if you're building an automation, companies like ServiceNow, and I think even Power Automate does this for Microsoft. They'll alert the IT organization of what you're trying to do, and here's the data that you're using, and it's a really big automation. You might want to take a look at it, et cetera. So I think we need some of those systems in place if we're going to be successful with this approach. We don't want a lot of disasters to happen, even though, as I say, they don't seem to have happened thus far, and a lot of this has been going on for a while.
Yeah, and
Excellent.
I think the pace of change is happening so quickly, it's conceivable that people do need to start to be very careful, right?
Yeah.
'Cause-
Well, thank you so much, Tom, and we'll definitely include the link to your upcoming book. I really appreciate you joining us today, and it's been a fantastic conversation.
My
Thanks, Tom.
pleasure. Thanks for getting up so early.
Thanks, guys.